Something you have to understand about Konstantin Kisin is that he was not someone that was particularly invested in the whole Israeli-Arab conflict, in issues to do with the Jewish people and anti-Semitism. He's not Jewish himself, although he acknowledges, I think he has a grandfather that's Jewish. And he is just the host of a podcast, Trigonometry, that tackles all kinds of topics. Since October 7th, out of curiosity, he wanted to get to understand the issue more and more. And he has, after learning and speaking to people on all sides, come very firmly in the Jewish and the Israel side of the argument. I want to show you a clip of him explaining his thought process throughout this journey. It's absolutely fascinating and it's essential viewing. Have a watch.
As regular viewers will know, Israel is not one of my issues. It's not a country I've been to, and until recently, not one I've commented on. When the terrorist attack happened on October 7th, 2023, my reaction was a combination of horror and, strange as it may sound, curiosity. Whenever something happens in the world that I do not understand, my instinct is to try to learn as much as I can before forming an opinion. That's why I said little for a year after October 7th, instead engaging with people on all sides of the argument. On Trigonometry, we interviewed pro-Israel voices like Ben Shapiro, Natasha Hausdorff, and eventually Benjamin Netanyahu himself, as well as those on the other side like Norman Finkelstein, Bassem Youssef, and Ahmed Fouad Al-Khatib. Eventually, having listened to the different arguments, I published what became my most viral article and video on the first anniversary of October 7th, entitled Why I'm Off the Fence About Israel's War. In it, I attempted to logically analyze the arguments and reach a conclusion. In short, my view was, and remains, that many of the anti-Israel arguments are at best driven by emotions which are understandable but irreconcilable with the facts, and at worst, deliberate manipulations designed to weaponize our natural horror at seeing the realities of war. Now, as the second anniversary of October 7th approaches, we are witnessing a spectacular cascade of events that reveal the unvarnished truth of this entire debate. And no, I'm not talking about President Trump's 21-point Gaza peace plan. I'm talking about the reaction to it, which reveals what this is actually about. The Trump plan is a roadmap to peace which delivers every single anti-war and pro-peace objective: an immediate end to the war, Israeli withdrawal, the release of over 2,000 Palestinian detainees in exchange for just 20 remaining living Israeli hostages, delivery of aid, reopening of the Rafah crossing with Egypt, a non-Israeli, non-Hamas administration of Gaza, an economic development package, a commitment against the displacement of Palestinians, no annexation, no occupation, and US-mediated talks between Israel and the Palestinians to achieve a, quote, peaceful and prosperous coexistence. To my complete lack of surprise, however, many of the most prominent campaigners against genocide who have graced our airwaves for the last 2 years have either stayed silent or openly called for Hamas to reject the deal. Crystal Ball of Breaking Points, who once published an extraordinary critique of our interview with Netanyahu, which she began by admitting she hadn't actually watched it, spent 20 minutes on her show insinuating that Hamas should not take the deal. Her social media is a continuous stream of virtue signaling with no mention of the fact that if you want to stop the genocide, an offer to do so is on the table. Candace Owens, another peace enthusiast, hasn't even bothered to comment on President Trump's peace proposal at all. She's too busy making money from Charlie Kirk's murder by conducting her own investigation into his assassination from the comfort of her own studio. Hint, Jews are involved. Here in Britain, Owen Jones has not only failed to urge Hamas to accept the deal, but on the contrary, has shared tweets and videos portraying it as unacceptable, effectively suggesting that it should be rejected. Meanwhile, Jeremy Corbyn dismissed the deal as yet another colonial endeavor. It's important to say, I don't believe it's in Hamas' interest to accept the Trump peace plan. After all, it requires them to disarm and relinquish any role in the future governance of Gaza. Hamas is perfectly entitled to reject a deal it dislikes, in exactly the same way Ukraine won't accept peace terms with Russia that it feels would damage its long-term interests. But Hamas's ability and willingness to reject the deal is a clear indicator of what the conflict in Gaza actually is. Far from being genocide, it's a war that Hamas started and is losing very badly. You cannot simultaneously cling to a bunch of war goals in order to retain power and continue terrorism, and at the same time claim to be a poor, hapless victim of genocide. The Tutsi in Rwanda, Armenians in the Ottoman Empire, Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto were not slaughtered because they were offered peace terms they then rejected. They were killed for being Tutsis, Armenians, and Jews. That's what genocide actually means. One of the oldest tricks used by liars throughout the ages is what I call sleight of mouth, where definitions are stretched beyond their remit to get people to believe lies. This is a powerful technique because if I can get you to misapply the term genocide to the conflict in Gaza, I can get you to stop seeing it as a battle between two belligerents and instead treat Israel as the criminal and Hamas as the victim. What the last few days have shown is that the overwhelming majority of those demanding an end to the so-called genocide in Gaza do not believe it is one themselves, as demonstrated by their unwillingness to pressure Hamas to accept a deal that would end it. This is a war. Their side is losing, and they're using the suffering of Palestinian civilians, human shields placed in harm's way by Hamas, to generate clicks, likes, and views.
So Konstantin is, of course, a great voice of reason, and he does that simply by asking questions. And for anyone who truly wishes to be objective, who truly wishes to just know the facts, I've said this time and again, it's not difficult to understand the rights and wrongs of this conflict. Not just the recent Gaza conflict, but the entire Israeli-Arab conflict. It doesn't take a historical PhD in order to get to understand the roots of this conflict, the causation of this conflict, and what is ultimately needed to resolve it. The thing that I do find interesting, though, and that interests people, is we're still so surprised that there's these double standards towards Jewish people. That there's still this obsession with the Jews, and we're so shocked and surprised by anti-Semitism. But I can't believe it. I can't believe it now, in living memory of the Holocaust. Well, the Holocaust is in living memory, which means that we shouldn't be surprised by this. Why do we keep getting so surprised by anti-Semitism? Instead of being constantly surprised when this has been a constant for 3,000 years, perhaps it's time for us to understand the deeper mechanisms of what's really going on here. To think that we can just solve this by, insisting that the world holds us to the same standards as everyone else. And just by insisting that we be treated the same. Why do we think that would work? Why? If this is a constant that's been there for 3,000 years, and we say, oh, well, no, because now the world really understands the importance of morality and human rights. Yeah, some of the world do. We've definitely improved as a world. But again, the Holocaust is in living memory. So we have to accept that anti-Semitism has morphed. It has morphed and mutated in a way that allows it to survive in a world that supposedly cares about human rights, simply by saying it's the Jews who are breaking the human rights. So that's what they've done. So no, don't be surprised that it's continued. Don't be surprised that anti-Semitism has mutated. Instead, let's try and get to the root cause of it. What is the root cause of anti-Semitism? Well, that's a huge topic, but it's also quite straightforward if you just want to get to the heart of it. The rabbis of the Talmud summarized it in one sentence. They spent many pages devoted many pages of the Talmud to debating how long and wide and tall a sukkah should be. But anti-Semitism, they summarized it in a sentence. They said the hatred of the nations towards the Jews comes from Sinai. They said the Sinah, which is Hebrew for hatred, comes from Sinai. It's like a play on words, Sinah, Sinai. It is a spiritual war against the very mission, the destined mission of the Jews given to them at Mount Sinai. It's trying to stop the Jewish people from being their destined role as light to the nations. It is the force of darkness which hates the force of light. By the way, we as Jews should be very complimented that it is that our enemies are who they are, because they represent and have represented throughout history the most evil darkest of ideologies and human inclinations. So we should be complimented that they see us as their main enemy. But the only solution, therefore, is to keep shining that light brighter and brighter. That spiritual light, that light of Torah, that light of Sinaitic morality that we were given. So it's no use thinking, let's just show the world how we're a Western liberal democracy. That's not who the Jewish people were meant to be. Even though, ironically, many elements of Western democracy came from ideas in the Hebrew Bible. And the world won't accept us as simply one like all the other nations. So if we keep doing that, it's not going to work. I think we have in our heads this sense that if we speak the truth, it will just be more provocative. That's not been my experience. My experience is when you speak the truth, even without justification, you just speak something that is true, it lands well. As long as you're confident in how you say it and unequivocal, it lands well. Because the truth has to resonate. It's the truth. And for those who say the truth shouldn't be relevant, we just have to play a cynical game, well, if you've given up on the truth, you might as well give up on life. Before we wrap up, I want to share something important with you. The entire anti-Israel movement is built on one central accusation, that in 1948, Israel stole the land, and ever since, Palestinians have simply been resisting. But what if everything we've been told about this story is untrue? What if the real history of 1948 shows not Arabs being forced out, but Jews, while seeking peace, having to fight for their survival against a genocidal enemy that willed its destruction long before Israel's re-establishment? Have a watch of the trailer for our new, groundbreaking and essential documentary entitled What Really Happened in 1948. And if you want to see the full film, just click the link in the video description. In 1948, the world witnessed the rebirth of the Jewish state, the State of Israel. A moment celebrated as a miracle of survival and self-determination after centuries of persecution and the horrors of the Holocaust. Yet for decades, this event has been twisted into a narrative of theft and catastrophe, with the so-called Nakba portrayed as Israel's original sin, where Jews allegedly stole Arab land and displaced innocents in a premeditated act of ethnic cleansing. But what if this story is fundamentally inverted? What if the cause and effect are the other way around? Not Israel aggressively seizing territory and Arabs responding in self-defense, but Arabs, driven by deep-seated hatred, rejecting the Jews' legal and historical rights to live in their ancestral homeland and waging a genocidal war long before Israel's re-establishment. In this JTV Plus documentary, we're going to uncover the unvarnished truth about 1948, the centuries of pogroms and anti-Semitic violence that set the stage, the Arab leaders' explicit calls for extermination, and the defensive war Israel fought to secure its existence. We'll challenge the pervasive lies head-on, showing how Arab rejection of peace wasn't about creating a Palestinian state, but about denying Jews the right to live at all. From the Nazi-allied leader of the Arabs in Palestine, the Mufti al-Husseini, to the forgotten occupations by Jordan and Egypt, when no Palestinian state was even considered, this is the story of a conflict rooted not in displacement, but in whether the Jews deserve to live in their homeland. Join us as we debunk the myths with facts, confront the historical record fairly but firmly, and reveal why 1948 was not an act of aggression, but a righteous response to annihilation. This is what really happened in 1948. To watch this JTV Plus documentary and access much more premium content, click on the link in the video description.